Alexander Grant was the kind of man newspapers loved to write about and competitors feared to meet in a boardroom. At only 41, he was one of the richest men in the country, a self-made billionaire who had transformed Grant Enterprises into a global powerhouse. His face was often on magazine covers, his words quoted in business schools, his presence commanding respect wherever he went. But beneath the tailored suits, polished shoes, and commanding voice lived a man whose empire had been built on relentless ambition. An ambition that had carried him far in the corporate world, but left him stranded in the one relationship that mattered most, the bond with his 7-year-old daughter, Emily. To outsiders, Alexander's life seemed perfect. A fleet of cars at his disposal, penthouses in the city, vacation homes by the ocean, private jets that could whisk him across the world on a whim. Yet none of it mattered when he sat across from Emily at a dinner table and realized he had no idea what she was trying to tell him. His late wife, Claire, had always been the one who bridged that gap. She had been Emily's voice, her anchor, and her gentle interpreter of the silent world she lived in. Claire had spent years learning sign language, even before Emily's diagnosis was confirmed, insisting that their daughter would never feel alone, never feel like she was missing something, just because she couldn't hear. But 2 years ago, cancer had taken Claire away, and with her went the bridge that had connected Alexander to Emily. Since then, Alexander had done what he thought he did best: throw money at the problem. Tutors, speech therapists, cutting-edge devices, private specialists flown in from abroad. He told himself he was trying. But deep down, he knew the truth. He had been hiding behind his work, using his empire as a shield from the crushing reality that he didn't know how to be the father his daughter needed. The night that would change everything began in one of the most elegant restaurants in New York, a place where deals worth millions were whispered over glasses of wine and celebrities dined without fear of interruption. The waitstaff moved with practiced grace, the lighting was soft, and every table seemed to glow under the golden chandeliers. Alexander sat at a corner booth, his usual air of authority intact, but his eyes kept drifting to the little girl across from him. Emily wore a pale blue dress Claire had bought for her years ago, her dark curls pinned back with a ribbon. Her small fingers fidgeted with the edge of her napkin. Her lips curved into a soft pout. She looked at her father, her hands moving in quick, practiced signs. Alexander's chest tightened as he tried to follow, but the motions blurred together. He caught one word, maybe two, but the rest was a mystery. Slow down, he said gently, his voice betraying a strain of helplessness. Emily slowed, repeating the signs, her eyes wide with expectation. Alexander tried again, his mind scrambling to piece together the gestures. Was she talking about school? About her art class? His shoulders slumped, the words failing him. I don't understand, he admitted, hating the way her smile faltered in disappointment. The silence between them was heavier than any boardroom confrontation he had ever faced. It was then that the waitress appeared. She was young, mid-20s perhaps, with auburn hair pulled into a neat bun and eyes that carried a kindness rare in a city where most servers moved with robotic indifference. She greeted Alexander politely, then crouched slightly to Emily's level. Hi there, sweetheart, she said warmly. Emily looked up at her shyly, her hands twitching, as if caught between wanting to communicate and fearing another wall of misunderstanding. And then, the waitress did something that made Alexander's heart stop. She lifted her hands and began to sign. The movements were smooth, fluid, practiced, as if she had been doing this her entire life. Emily's face lit up instantly, her previous gloom vanishing into a burst of excitement. She giggled silently, her little fingers springing to life as she responded with equal speed. The two fell into conversation, their hands weaving stories, their expressions animated with joy. Alexander sat frozen, his fork halfway to his mouth, his world narrowing to the sight of his daughter laughing. Truly laughing. For the first time in what felt like forever. He couldn't hear what they were saying, but he could feel it. He could feel the connection, the ease, the freedom Emily experienced in those few moments. His chest ached with guilt, his hands tightening on the tablecloth. Here he was, a man who had mastered the language of contracts, negotiations, and stock markets. Yet he couldn't speak the one language that mattered most. He swallowed hard, his eyes stinging. The waitress glanced at him briefly, then back at Emily, translating softly. "She's telling me about the drawing she made today. A picture of you and her." Alexander's heart skipped. She drew me." The waitress nodded, smiling. "Yes. She said you were wearing one of your suits, of course. She even made sure to draw your tie straight." Emily's eyes sparkled as she nodded vigorously, her small shoulders shaking with a silent laugh. Alexander's lips trembled into a faint smile, but his throat was tight, his mind spinning. He hadn't even known about the drawing. How many other things had he missed? How many secrets had Emily tried to share, only to give up when he didn't understand? The waitress excused herself to place their order, but Alexander barely touched his food when it arrived. He couldn't tear his eyes from Emily, who kept glancing toward the kitchen in anticipation of the waitress returning. His daughter had found someone who understood her effortlessly. The realization crushed him and yet ignited something deep inside. On the drive home, the city lights blurred past the car windows as Alexander gripped the steering wheel with unusual intensity. Emily sat beside him in her booster seat, humming tunelessly to herself in the way she sometimes did, tapping her hands against her knees. Alexander's mind replayed the image of her laughing with the waitress, the light in her eyes when she was understood. By the time they pulled into the long driveway of their sprawling estate, Alexander's decision was made. He would no longer let his daughter live in a world where her own father was a stranger to her language. That very night, after tucking Emily into bed, Alexander went to his private study, a room lined with bookshelves and leather chairs where he usually pored over contracts. Instead of reviewing deals, he picked up his phone and made a call to a bookstore, requesting every available book, guide, and manual on American Sign Language. When the delivery arrived the next morning, he carried the heavy stack of books himself into the living room, startling the house staff who had never seen their boss so hands-on. Emily padded into the room, still in her pajamas, her curls a mess, rubbing sleep from her eyes. She stopped short when she saw the mountain of books on the coffee table. Alexander knelt down to her level, holding up the first book. "Emily," he said softly, his voice trembling with something unfamiliar, vulnerability. "Teach me." Emily blinked in surprise, her small mouth parting. Then, slowly, her lips curled into the brightest smile he had ever seen. She climbed onto the couch, opening the book eagerly. Her tiny hands formed the first sign, demonstrating patiently. Alexander copied her. Clumsy at first, his fingers stiff, but he kept trying. Emily giggled, correcting him, guiding his hands into the right shapes. For the first time in years, Alexander laughed, not the polished, practiced laugh he used in interviews, but a raw, genuine laugh. They spent hours practicing, the mansion echoing with a new kind of life. The silence was no longer empty. It was filled with meaning, with laughter, with connection being rebuilt one gesture at a time. That night, after Emily fell asleep with a smile still lingering on her lips, Alexander stood by her bedside and whispered a vow. "No deal, no company, no fortune will ever come before you again. I promise." He kissed her forehead, his eyes lingering on her peaceful face. For the first time since Claire's death, he felt like he wasn't failing. He was beginning again, not as the billionaire the world admired, but as the father his daughter deserved.